continuing our series on rediscovering the gospel in Les Miserable. And if you're brand new here this morning, we'll catch you up a little bit. And if you've been here in preparation for it, you know that this is something about which I'm passionate. It's something that I would not have believed, perhaps, the first time I was exposed to the musical 20 years ago. I'd be preaching the sermon series on that. I just thought it was something for my enjoyment. But every time I revisit this story and or see the production, the theatrical production, I'm reminded how God will speak in so many ways if we will allow Him to speak in the way He wants to speak. And sometimes it's through a message, and sometimes it's through a movie or a theater. Sometimes it's through the life of someone around us, a kind word, a hug. And so this morning we're going to continue, and the title of the message today is The Bishop's Gift. That was me, I know. I'm sorry, I was trying to get those glasses somewhere. I'll sit still, I promise. And this morning, we're going to see a clip here. I want to give you a little background to prepare you for this. I asked last week, how many of you have either seen the movie Les Miserables or you've seen the Broadway production? Okay? All right, good. How many have not? Okay, good. All right, good. Well, just as a little bit of a background, Victor Hugo, who wrote Hunchback of Notre Dame, actually wrote this book, and it was over 1,400 pages long. It was a massive book. And he wrote it during the 1800s. When it first went on sale, poor people pulled their money and stood in line because it was so popular. They wanted to read this story it's an evolved, overlayered story that takes place in the time of the French Revolution. And it focuses upon an individual by the name of Jean Valjean. And it focuses upon him because he's a recipient of God's grace and God's mercy. Someone once said that mercy is when you really got the goods on someone and you let them off the hook. And I don't know about you, but you remember a time that was the case? Someone let you off the hook in your life? Or perhaps a time that maybe someone had offended you or wronged you and you let them off the hook. Well, I can remember back in college, there was a friend of mine, B.J. Keeter. We were in theology class, and they were asking how do you define grace. And C.S. Lewis was once asked, what makes Christianity different than every other religion? And he said, it's simple. It's grace. And we were sharing stories of grace, and Keeter told the story about how when he was a kid, he was throwing rocks in his backyard. And I don't think it was purely accidental. He was throwing rocks at his neighbor's house. And he landed a good one, and it broke her window. And of course, he knew he was in trouble. He went back into the house, and sure enough, about an hour later, he sees the neighbor coming across the yard, and he thought, oh boy, am I in trouble now. What he didn't see when Mrs. Douglas knocked on the door was that she was carrying a plate of cookies. And she said, just want you to know, we were thinking about replacing that window, and you just helped us make the decision. And she gave him the cookies and never talked to him about breaking the window again. And that always stuck in his mind as a picture of God's grace. In the opening song and story of the series, it's going to set the stage for all the stories to follow. When you first see Les Miserables, whether it be the theater production or the musical, that is a reduction of that 1,400-page book, it's almost painful. The first 10 minutes or so, it's gloomy, it's dark, and you think, what in the world would make me want to be seeing a story like this? Because people are enslaved, they're held captive. There's a gruff man by the name of Jean Valjean. He's serving a prison sentence because he had broken the law 20 years prior to that. His daughter, his sister's child has died for lack of nourishment, and he broke into a bakery and stole a loaf of bread, and he got caught. So he was sentenced to 5 years of imprisonment for stealing a loaf of bread. And then, because during that time he tried to run, he was given an additional 15 years, and so he ended up serving 20 years for stealing a loaf of bread. When he is finally released, as was the custom in that day, he wasn't truly released, but rather he was given what was called a yellow ticket of leave. He was put on what was reality a permanent parole. And so anywhere he went and everywhere he would travel, he had to carry the yellow ticket that identified him as an ex-convict. And in fact, he looks back and he says, they murdered Jean Valjean and gave me a number 24601. And so 15 minutes, actually not even 15 minutes into this 3-hour production, at the very heart of it, you have Jean Valjean, who's just been released from 20 years of prison, and he goes out on the streets trying to find a job, and everyone's turning him away, or when he does work, they pay him half of what the other men get. And he's angry at the world, he's angry at life, he's angry at God. And at the end of a day where he's been turned around and rejected, he ends up in the door of a bishop's house, and the bishop is the Bishop of Dean. I'm going to talk a little bit about him, but this clip is at the very beginning, and you're going to see that this morning as he's just coming off the streets and experiencing that, and that's not the right one there. Let's see. Yeah. Go up to the top with your, no, good. Take that back up there, please. Yeah. And go up to the top where the label says 25th anniversary. Try president. No, on the very top. No, yeah, try that one. Yeah, there you go. Oh, dear Jesus, please let it work. What? Yeah, okay.
You'll have to go. I'll pay you off for the day. Collect your bits and pieces there and be on your way.
You have given me half what the other men get. This handful of tin wouldn't buy my sweat.
You broke the law. It's there for people to see. Why should you get the same as honest men like me?
And now I know what freedom feels. A jailer always at your heels. It is a law. This piece of paper in my hand, it makes me curse that on the land. It is a law. Like a cur, I walk the street. The dirt beneath their feet. Coming soon, for you are weary, and the night is cold out there. Though our lives are very humble, what we have to share. There is wine here to revive you. There is bread to make you strong. There's a bed to rest till morning. Rest from pain and rest from wrong. In a need my fill I had the lion's share. The silver in my hand cost twice what I had earned. In all those 19 years, a lifetime of despair. And yet he trusted me. The old fool trusted me, he'd done his bit of good. I played the grateful serf and thanked him like I should. But when the house was still, I got up in the night, took the silver, took my fight. His reverence your story, let us see if he's impressed. You were lodging here last night, you were the honest bishop's guest. And then out of Christian goodness, when he learned about your plight, you maintain he made a present of this silver. That is right, but my friend, you left so early, surely something slipped your mind. You forgot I gave these also, would you leave the best behind? So, messieurs, you may release him, for this man has spoken true. I commend you for your duty. Now God's blessing go with you. But remember this, my brother, see in this some higher plan. You must use this precious silver land. God has raised you out of darkness. I have bought your soul for become a thief in the night, become a dog on the run, and have I fallen so far, and is the hour so late, that nothing remains but the cries of my hate, the cries in the dark that nobody hears. Here I stand at the turning of the years. If there's another way to go, I missed you 21 years ago. My life was a war that could never be won. They gave me a number and Mother Valjean when they take me and left me for dead, just for stealing a mouthful of bread. Yet why did I allow this man to touch my soul and teach me love? He treated me like any other. He gave me his trust. He called me brother. My life he claims for God above. Can such things be? For I had come to hate the world. This world that always hated me. Take an eye for an eye. Turn your heart into stone. This is all I have lived for. This is all I have known. One word from him and I'd be back beneath the lash upon the rack. Instead he offers me my freedom. I feel my shame inside me like a knife. He told me that I have a soul. How does he know what spirit comes to move my life? Is there another way to go? I am reaching, but I fall, and the night is closing in as I stare into the void, to the whirlpool of my sin. I'll escape now from that world, from the world of Jean Valjean. Jean Valjean is nothing now. Another story must
As I said in the earlier service, and again, it doesn't take any manufacturer on my part, but I have seen that piece more than 100 times easily, both live and in tapes, and I still, my eyes become faucets when I see that, because like all of us, at one time or another, we were under condemnation of death and held captive to things that we so wanted to be free of. And at some point in our lives, God came and, while we were yet sinners, handed us golden candlesticks or silver candlesticks, and did so freely and on his own favor and on his own mercy. And so this is 15 minutes into this production, and the next 2.5 hours or so is a time of not Valjean coming into a time of redemption some years later, rising and taking the things that the bishop had given him, and indeed becoming an honest man and the mayor of a town and employing others. And that's how the story goes along. And what I wanted to do this morning was kind of focus on a little bit, though, the character of the bishop here. Because if you were to go back and read and imagine the difficulty of, again, taking a book that's 1,400 pages, reducing that to a novel or a novelette and a theater production of 3 hours, and then trying to reduce that into a little bit on a Sunday morning. So, as I did say in the early service, I had 16 pages, 8 pages have been already taken out. So the 8 pages remain. I hope you'll get the message that I intended to get, and I believe God will speak here. But when we look at the life of the bishop, it's in the play, it's just this brief moment, and then he makes an appearance at the end. And you realize that the whole story of Valjean's life takes place and is changed because of one person who stepped up with the gospel of grace. And his name is the Bishop of Digne. And if you would go back and read the actual book by Victor Hugo, he takes almost 25 or 30 pages to develop the story of the life of the Bishop of Digne. And one thing that becomes clear is that this one act with Jean Valjean isn't an exception, but rather it is just a manifestation of his life, that he is a recipient of God's grace, and therefore he gives that grace to everyone around him. And so, in a conversation about another occurrence in the life of the Bishop of Digne, he's getting ready to go up and visit. He pastors a church down in the town, but he also does kind of a circuit ministry in the mountains. And he's going up in the mountains to visit this one little village that has a small congregation, and it's an Episcopal congregation. And but he's being warned by his friends, and in fact he's being warned by the mayor of the town. You don't want to go up there because they're bandits on the road, and they're thieves and they're robbers and they murder people, and people go in the mountains and never appear again. And so, if anything, you just don't want to do that, Bishop. You don't want to go into a place of unnecessary peril and risk. And this is the conversation from the actual text of the book. The mayor of the town says to the bishop, he says, well, what happens if you run into the bandits? And the bishop replies, well, then they too surely need someone to tell them about the good Lord. And the mayor responds, but they're a pack of wolves. And the bishop responds, well, my dear mayor, perhaps it's precisely this flock that Jesus has called me to pastor. But monsieur, they will take everything you've got. Well, that's okay, I have nothing. Well, they'll kill you. To which he replies, a little old priest like me? Go on, why would they bother? Well, just imagine if you run into them. Well, I'll ask them for money for the poor. Monsieur, don't go, for Christ's sake. You're taking your life in your hands. To which the bishop responds, my dear mayor, isn't that just the point? I'm not in this world to take care of my life. I'm here to take care of other souls. And so off it goes. And imagine that. Imagine living our lives to that standard. Because if you imagine it, you're starting to grasp the gospel of Jesus Christ, to which we've been called. That it truly is not about us and about our lives, but rather laying down our lives as Christ laid down his life for us. And that we would take up our cross and follow him. And so the bishop goes off into the mountains, and don't you wonder what would happen? Because all of his friends gave all the negative reports and said, this is what's going to happen if you do that. Well, off he goes. And after staying a fortnight in the mountain village with his friends, he decides to celebrate a goodbye mass. But he discovers that the village is so poor that they don't even have the adequate Episcopal props to do the mass. And nevertheless, the bishop just decides, I'm going to go with what I got. He began his service, only to be interrupted by 2 horsemen from the bandit gang who broke in the back door in the very midst of the service, walk up to the altar with a bag, pour it out in front of the bishop. And it happens to be a bag full of treasures that they had recently stolen from neighboring churches. And with a warm smile, the bishop announces, "I told you things would work out." Well, suffice it to say that Victor Hugo could have written 100 books if he would have traced the lives of all the people that bishop changed just by being instant in season. By remembering that this is the grace that I received and this is the grace that I am called to give. And so when you see this bishop meet Jean Valjean, you see two distinct characters that every one of us can identify one or the other our lives with. And probably at one point, if you're a believer especially, you've experienced the grace, but at some other point you've experienced the Jean Valjean before grace as well. Two contrary characters. One is a taker, the other is a giver. One is pessimistic and hopeless, and the other optimistically hope-giving with every word and every phrase. One always fears the worst. The other always believes the best. One is hard, the other is soft and tender. One has an attitude of, took my silver and took my flight. And the other has the attitude with what we have to share. One is full of hatred, hating the world that always hated me. And one is full of love. And one is broken by the harshness of life. And the other is broken before the harshness of life. And so the life of Jean Valjean is forever changed by the bishop's gift of grace. And as we turn the scenes and we turn the pages of the book and we watch the scenes unfold, one thing that we just cannot escape from is that he didn't just take the silver and take the grace, but the rest of the story is how he pours that grace into the lives of those around him. To Fantine, the desperate mother, to Fauchelevent, to Cosette, to Marius, and even at one point to Javert, the prosecutor who wants to put him back in prison. He's constantly pouring out grace into their lives. And so when you come to the finale of the musical, you hear the words that call across the centuries and around the globe. Words that invite all people of all generations and all nations to join in. And Jean Valjean, in this revolution of grace, and the words are, will you join in our crusade? Will you be strong and stand with me? Somewhere beyond the barricade, is there a world you long to see? Do you hear the people sing? And do you hear the distant drum? It is the future that they bring when tomorrow comes. So, when I entered into this, I had to confess to some of my friends that, you know what, I know some people that are just going to say, I don't know anything about Les Miserables, and what's a pastor doing? He's going off crazy on us again, and picking something that, just seems pop culture. This is anything but pop culture. This is the essence of the gospel. And there's nothing theatrical really about it. It is the relevance of revolution, because when God really touches a life, it's a revolutionary experience. And so it is fitting that this story takes place in the midst of battle and revolution and barricades, but it's also the story about each one of us and our lives and the revolution that we desperately need to be the people that God's called us to be. And so what's the application? Well, if I could sum it up, it would be easy to quote a bunch of scriptures, and they give heartwarming descriptions of the church and the church's purpose and the place in the world. But there may be no words better than describe the church that I hope we love so much than the opening lines of this song. Come and serve, for you are weary, and the night is cold out there. And though our lives are very humble, whatever we have to share. There's wine here to revive you. And there's bread to make you strong. And there's a place to rest from mourning, rest from pain, and rest from wrong. And I know those words were penned by a secular songwriter by the name of Herbert Kretzmer for a secular musical play that's not meant in any way to be a treatise of purpose for the church. But I won't let the enemy keep me from hearing God when he wants to speak. and even in such a way as a dramatic musical. Because, listen to the words again. See if they don't capture the very best of who the church should be. Come and serve, for you are weary, and the night is cold out there, and though our lives are very humble, what we have to share. How beautiful it was we had communion this morning. There's wine. It means a lot more than just wine to us, doesn't it? There's wine to be revived, and there's bread to make you strong. There's a place to rest till morning, and rest from pain, and rest from wrong. Isn't that the message that the Church of Jesus Christ should be giving? Isn't that the message that should resonate with us? To the weary and the restless of the world? Because too often we have failed to do that. We look back in the past centuries of the church, in the dark ages, and most recently in our own generation, when the church has gotten off course from the very pure gospel to which we are called, and the very heart of the message which we've been given to share with the world. And it's sad when we become so boring and irrelevant and repetitious that it adds to our weariness rather than to provide us life and hope. And it's sad when the church becomes so inwardly focused that we aren't welcomed into the inner circle until, you paid your tithes for 9 years and you go to the 3 secret handshakes. You know what I mean? How sometimes that's what it feels like to get involved and engaged in a church fellowship and a Bible. Maybe we don't intend to do it, but that's the way it feels to those who God brings across our path. It's sad when the church gets so caught up with the Sunday-to-Sunday business of doing church that it forgets about those outside who are lost and broken and weary and cold. And it's sad when the church is more content to be a country club for Christians rather than a hospital and a feeding place for sinners. We talked about it the past weekend, and I talked about it from this pulpit. It just amazes me that I had a new revelation this year after walking with the Lord for 35 or 40 years or so. That we live in the third age of God making himself relevant to the world. The first age was through the law, through the prophets. And then the second age came when grace and truth came in the person of Jesus Christ. God poured himself in flesh. And for 3.5 brief years, we see God in ways we can understand it. We feel him touch us through his touch of the sick and reaching out to the poor. But then in the third great age, it's this age of grace, when he pours himself out in the invisible form, as the prophet Joel said he would do and come to us. And he said, I will pour my spirit out on all flesh, and this is what you're going to do. You're going to build a great building. No. You're going to start a dynamic domination. No. You're going to acquire great furnishings and wealth. No. You're going to dream dreams. You're going to see visions. Come again? Dream dreams, see visions. Why? Because God is the God who gives dreams and visions. Everything in our lives, especially of the positive nature, have come because somebody believed them for us or we believed them for ourselves, and certainly God dreamed them for us. And so, what is your dream for the church? What is the dream for your life? Let me sum it up like this. Personally, if I were to share with you some of the best of my dreams for our church, they'd be reflected in the words of the song we looked at this morning. That we would be a place that is a safe place for tired, weary travelers. Bless you as you blessed us, and we go in your